Poet, rock god, lizard king, rock and roll icon. Jim Morrison was a tortured soul who wound up a member of the unfortunate 27 Club, unless he faked his own death, that is. Jim Morrison may be a music legend, but as his bandmates and representatives of his record label have been quick to point out, the singer's drinking habits were equally legendary.
Name? Jim. Occupation.
According to the Doors keyboard player Ray Manzarek, this led to the occasional confrontation, especially during the making of the band's most famous record, L.A. Woman, in 1971. Up to then, Morrison's drinking hadn't impacted the quality of his lyrics, but the same couldn't be said about the singer's health. Drummer John Dinsmore straight up calls Morrison an alcoholic, and while the frontman had been able to pick himself up in the early stages of their career, by the time they recorded The Soft Parade in 1969, he was getting blackout drunk and passing out in the studio. Perhaps the most revealing story of Jim Morrison's relationship with alcohol during the L.A. Woman era comes from Jack Holzman, founder of Elektra Records, who remembered, "After the album was done, Jim and I went out, supposedly to dinner. I ate, he drank." As a rock star, Jim Morrison was the ultimate bad boy. He backed this reputation up with his many run-ins with authorities. In fact, during his short life, Morrison was arrested 6 times. The first of these came in 1963, when Morrison got drunk at a football game and started mocking both the crowd and the players. When the cops eventually arrived, he stole an officer's helmet and umbrella from a police car. Goofy and relatively harmless as Morrison's first arrest might have been, his next run-in with the police was considerably darker. In 1966, he claimed to have killed a classmate during a road trip and buried him in the desert. When he was inevitably arrested, it came out that he'd also kissed a 14-year-old girl without her consent. Morrison was slapped with sexual assault charges, and the police had many no doubt interesting questions about his classmate's fate. But when the kid turned up unharmed, the singer was ultimately let go. Morrison's other arrests involved the kind of stuff you'd probably expect from the Lizard King: variations of public drunkenness and the occasional bout of lewd behavior. Jim Morrison was no stranger to arrest warrants, but his personal best was probably the aftermath of a particularly tumultuous concert in March of 1969. Over one frenzied night in Miami, Florida, the Doors singer managed to rack up no less than 5 misdemeanor charges, and a felony to boot. He could have been sentenced to 3 years and 150 days in prison. As Larry Mahoney of the Miami Herald put it at the time, they'd crucify him if they could. They're so worked up. So what did Morrison do to warrant that kind of anger?
Would anybody like to see my genitals?
If you asked authorities, the Lizard King had exposed his mini lizard on stage, which, along with some public profanity and the obligatory to Morrison public drunkenness, was more than enough to stir the pot big time.
We have taken out 2 warrants for Jim Morrison. One of them is for indecent exposure.
Morrison turned himself in a month after the fact and was found guilty of public profanity and exposure. Whether he would have seen the inside of a state penitentiary or not, we'll never know. Morrison died before his appeal. The whole unfortunate incident was finally put to rest in 2010 when Florida's Clemency Board and Governor Charlie Crist posthumously pardoned Morrison. Jim Morrison's many misadventures with the law earned him some pretty unfortunate distinctions. Mr. Mojo Rising may in fact have been the first rock musician arrested in the middle of his own concert. It was December 9th, 1967, and the Doors were playing a concert in New Haven, Connecticut. Before the show, Morrison kept himself busy by fooling around with a fan in a backstage shower. A local cop who was in the security detail didn't recognize the star and told him to leave the area.
It's cool, I'm with the band.
This didn't sit well with the notoriously anti-establishment Morrison.
And Morrison turned around and said, "This is your last chance to eat me," and pushed the cop.
The rock star was promptly maced for his troubles. After the misunderstanding had been taken care of and the officer had apologized, the concert started a bit later than it should have, and everything went roughly as well as you would expect under the circumstances. That is, not very well at all. The furious Morrison delivered such a vicious and insulting on-stage rant against the mace-happy officer and the police in general that the authorities stopped the show and arrested the singer on the spot. This set off a small riot that led to 13 more arrests. Jim Morrison spent much of 1967's Summer of Love in New York City, where he met more than his match in the form of Nico. Morrison fell for the iconic Velvet Underground collaborator as soon as he laid eyes on her, and she returned his affections. The slight Morrison and the statuesque Nico made an impressive, peculiar couple. They made music together, and all was well for about a month. See, Morrison already had a girlfriend, Pamela Corson, who struck back with a high-profile affair of her own. When Morrison found out, he dropped New York on the spot and drove back to LA without even bothering to wake Nico up. Understandably, she wasn't particularly happy about it. Of course, even without the fact that Jim Morrison was two-timing all along, it could be argued that the two didn't have the healthiest relationship. According to the book Nico, The Life and Lies of an Icon, their daily routine involved a considerable amount of drink and drugs and consisted of an ever-repeating cycle of affectionate argument rancor resolution. The fights often became physical, and though Nico says she would happily have married the man she has called her first love, he wasn't interested. Jim Morrison may have been a hugely influential rock star, but not everyone was willing to give him a free pass to do whatever he pleased. In fact, one of his staunchest opponents was his very own bandmate, drummer John Densmore. In a 2020 interview with The Guardian, Densmore reminisced about his relationship with Morrison, which was so bad that after the singer died, the drummer skipped his funeral and didn't visit the grave for 3 years. In fact, Densmore has called Morrison a lunatic and a psychopath, along with other, even more colorful names. He also made a spirited attempt at keeping the vocalist off the road and even briefly quit the band himself. But don't take Densmore's attitude toward Morrison to mean that he completely disliked the man. In the same Guardian interview, Densmore commented, "Did I hate Jim? No, I hated his self-destruction. He was a kamikaze who went out at 27. What can I say?" While the drummer fully admits that it took him several years to forgive the frontman's alcohol-fueled reign of terror, he eventually moved on to be a sort of protector of Morrison's legacy. He even sued his fellow surviving Doors members to stop them from licensing the band's music for car commercials and touring under the Doors name.
And I called him and said, what changed the name? I mean, the Doors without Jim is like the Stones without Mick.
Densmore said, "What can I say? Jim's ghost is behind me all the time." People who've seen the movie The Doors may remember the scene where young Jim Morrison witnessed the aftermath of a brutal car accident. This actually happened. In fact, Morrison's account was much worse than the movie portrayal of the incident. The singer was roughly 5 years old when he and his family were driving in New Mexico and passed a truck full of Native American people that had just crashed. Though Morrison admits that he didn't quite comprehend what was happening and understood the scene as funny red paint and people lying around, he did catch his parents' reaction, and the heaviness of the situation weighed on him. He said the incident marks the first time he knew fear.
Just a dream, Jimmy. That's all it is. It's just a dream.
Regardless of what young Jim actually saw, he immortalized his version of the events in the lyrics to the song Peace Frog. Indians scattered on dawn's highway bleeding, ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind. When it comes to vices and addiction, Jim Morrison is possibly most closely associated with alcohol. However, the depressed star was also an enthusiastic drug user who was regularly high, often while also drunk. This combination, along with his rather violent temper, could lead to problems, like his infamous 1967 onstage arrest in New Haven. Morrison's copious drug use plagued him right up until his death in 1971. In fact, some say that drugs directly contributed to his death, thanks to a long-standing rumor that attributes his passing, which was officially caused by heart failure, to a heroin overdose. Seeing as Doors photographer Bobby Klein has told The Guardian that Jim Morrison used to hate that particular drug, this would mean that the Lizard King's appetites grew, and perhaps his standards lowered, as his downward spiral picked up speed. Jim Morrison was a rock star with massive sex appeal.
He was called the Lizard King for a reason. I mean, he did slither and he did move sort of reptilian-like.
Consider that it's perhaps surprising that, as Angie Pamela of Cultura Collectiva tells us, the Lizard King spent the majority of his rock star days with the same woman, Pamela Corson. The two shared a similar hedonistic outlook on life. And much like Morrison, Corson was also a smart, artistic rebel with a mysterious vibe. The two met when Morrison was 22 and Corson was 19, and their story continued until his death at 27. However, said story was not always a happy one. Their relationship was extremely intense, violent, and marred by substance abuse, periods of separation, and infidelity. Though this applied to both parties, biography tells us that Morrison was downright infamous for his womanizing. Apart from Corson, a notable Jim Morrison companion was Patricia Connealy, a music journalist he was briefly married to in 1970. However, he was far from faithful in that relationship as well. By 1970, Jim Morrison's alcoholism had caused him to balloon into a bearded, chubby parody of his former rock god self. and his ability to perform on stage had suffered greatly as well. Things came to a head in a December 12th show in New Orleans in what would be Morrison's last performance with the Doors. In this final show, the singer kept forgetting the lyrics to the songs, and when he realized the situation, he attempted to correct the course with a long-winded bad joke that failed to land. By the time Light My Fire came along, he was forced to use the microphone stand for support. In the middle of the song's solo section, he sat on the drum riser and stopped performing altogether. When drummer John Densmore attempted to reboot the singer by poking him with his foot, Morrison walked back to the mic stand. Unfortunately, the ever-unpredictable singer then smashed it and walked out in the middle of the set. This was the last straw for the other band members, who decided that the Doors were done playing live shows. Jim Morrison's life was full of personal troubles, rock star excess, and general debauchery. 1971 found him in Paris in pretty rough shape. Unfortunately, on July 3rd that year, it became clear that he would never leave the City of Lights. That was the day Morrison's girlfriend, Pamela Corson, discovered the 27-year-old Morrison's lifeless body in their apartment's bathtub. The reported cause of death, heart failure.
The death of another rock musician was disclosed today. Jim Morrison, 27 years old, lead singer of The Doors.
Jim Morrison's death was as controversial as his life, and possibly even more so. There have been plenty of rumors, theories, and even entire books about the events leading up to his death. Some say the cause of death was not what the officials claim. Others have even wilder stories. For instance, singer Marianne Faithfull told Mojo in 2014 that Jim Morrison was murdered by her boyfriend, famed drug dealer Jean de Breteuil, who she says supplied Morrison with the drugs that killed him. There are even those who believe that the Lizard King managed to fake his death and went on to live in blissful obscurity.